It's my pleasure to introduce Andy Davis as our featured speaker today. Andy is an assistant research scientist at Odum School of Ecology at University of Georgia. Andy is an animal ecologist at heart, but with a really strong focus on ecophysiology. And his work has been published widely across a variety of top-tier ecological and biological journals, and covers a very broad range of disciplines and topics, a range of taxa, from migration patterns and mechanisms behind migration in birds and insects, physiological responses and stress responses in birds, amphibians, insects, as well as trying to understand the role of morphology and a variety of traits like color in dictating the ecology of species. And so invasion science is a relatively new field of inquiry for Andy. I think that, Andy, you mentioned that in the email to me. And so I'm really excited that we're able to get him here to share with us his work on joro spider invasions in the US. Andy, thank you for joining us, and you can take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah,
I think there's a yes. So thanks for the invitation to be here. I'm always happy to talk about my work. Brett, thanks for the introduction. I'm surprised you're able to sort of encapsulate what it is that I do, because sometimes I can't remember what it is I've done before. And the breadth of research that I've done really reflects my inability to focus, if anything else. So I don't think this is anything to brag about, that I work on so many different things. In fact, I'm not an invasion biologist, and I'm barely a spider biologist. I've always sort of had this sort of inner motto that I would be happy studying things that I can find in my backyard, and that sort of led me to what I'm going to talk about today, which is the joro spiders, because the joro spiders literally have shown up in my backyard. And so I kind of pivoted to start studying joros, mostly because I had no choice, because they're basically everywhere now. So that's what I'm going to tell you about today. The brief outline of this talk, I'll try to keep it short. I haven't really gone through this, so I'll try to make sure, I'll try to be cognizant of the time here. First, for people who aren't really familiar with this crazy critter, I'll give you some basics about it. I'll talk about some of the work that I'm doing in my lab, although it's not a whole lot right now. And I think that's sort of a similar theme for this entire species here. There really isn't a whole lot known about this species in this new range here. And then I'll give you some thoughts on what I think the spread of this thing will mean for the ecosystem and so forth. So just to back up, this joro spider has been invading the US. They're originally from Japan and East Asia. They were first discovered in 2013. This was the very first paper that was written on this, and it was done by some colleagues here at Georgia. And these folks here discovered the species in a region in Georgia here between Athens and Atlanta. Only a few of them were found at the time, based on where they were found near interstates. They suspected they probably arrived on a shipping container or some kind of vehicle, which sort of makes sense. I mean, spiders are transported a lot by this means. That's what we know about how they got here. Since then, as people have probably heard, they've been spreading. Before getting into too much of that, let me just briefly go over something like the 101, the basics of what spider biology is like. This is an egg sac, not of a joro, but of a spider. But this is how spiders sort of reproduce. And I'm telling you this because I kind of get these emails a lot, like, why aren't there spiders right now? Like here in March, why don't I see the spiders? It's because they're all in these egg sacs right now. The way most spiders work is that the eggs will hatch in the spring. The little babies come out of the egg sac and they sort of go do their thing. They grow and grow and grow until you get to be like spider size, like an actual spider. And you see those in like the summer, late summer, especially in the fall around here. So the fall is basically the spider time, the spider season around here. And then after the fall, the females will lay their egg sac and then they'll pass on. And then so that's kind of the general, the way spiders work here. And so right now, all the joro spiders are probably in these egg sacs and they're just sort of hatching. Interestingly, a lot of spiders, when their babies crawl out of the egg sacs, and when they get to be big enough, they'll do this thing called parachuting, where they'll send up a little thread into the air, and that thread will catch the wind, and then the spiders will just sort of fly away with the wind. That's called parachuting. A lot of spiders do it. Keep that in mind going forward, because a lot of people thought that this new species here was the parachuting spider, quote unquote, but that was a misnomer. So I've been studying this thing for the last couple of years, ever since they showed up in my backyard. I kind of got a name for myself doing this, because one study that I did, which I'll tell you about, sort of became kind of famous. It made headlines, so much so that my university put together this little video package, which I'll show you here. This sort of gives you an appreciation for this critter, for those of you who aren't familiar with it yet. You folks in the Southeast, you're probably familiar with a relative of this thing, which I'll get to next. But this is the joro spider. It's big and scary. It has really big webs, bright yellow and black and yellow legs. They're about the size of your palm. If you were to put one on your palm and stretch their legs apart. I tend to tell people that imagine like a grape with toothpicks sticking out of it as legs. That's about the size of a full-grown female joro spider. So they're striking for sure, and that's kind of why this whole story took off, really, because it's such a big, scary-looking spider, and everybody's afraid of spiders apparently. I think they're beautiful. Anyway, so there's a little bit more here. They're fun to watch. I mean, I can't help myself but watch these in my backyard. Okay, so moving on here. So some other things you will note about this species and its appearance is, the first thing you'll see is not the spider itself, but its web. They're at least 3 feet wide, and they're really strong. I'll get to that in a second, but some of these webs have like sticks in them. They're stuck in them because sticks will get trapped in them, and leaves, and you'll see all that debris in the webs, because these spiders here don't seem to clean their webs very much, and so all of the accumulated debris is sort of still hanging there in the webs, and they don't really like to rebuild their webs every day like other spiders do. So they make one web, a really big one, and they stick with it, and it sort of accumulates debris over time. It also tends to be very sort of clustery and haphazard looking, and lots of support strands going every which way. This is in my front yard, and they're very three-dimensional. And so on the one hand, it makes it look disorganized. But on the other hand, I think it adds to their strength, because there's so many support strands going every which way. And so when you see one of these things, you'll know it. I mean, it's pretty unmistakable. The 3D appearance of the web is kind of a dead giveaway for this genus, at least. Now, you folks in Florida and other parts of the Southeast might recognize these webs also, because there's a related species, which I'll get to next, which is already here in the Southeast. Another scary bit about the joros and their cousin is that they can have these multiple interconnected webs filled with dozens to maybe even more spiders, all in this one giant web cluster. It's like something out of the first scene of Indiana Jones, right? So it's this like massive wall of webs. And I think this is really interesting scientifically because, you know, one wonders how it is that this species can live together like this, or they can also live singly when they want to. Like what kind of traits do they have that allow them? Because you don't really see this with other spiders, right? You don't see these massive web colonies. I mean, there's a few colonial spiders out there, but anyway, I think this trait with these spiders actually is kind of interesting. So here in Georgia, where I am, I mean, in the late summer and fall, there's just webs everywhere. I mean, any wooded area, especially, they do tend to like the wooded spots. You'll see webs every 3 feet at least. If you're walking through the woods, you'll need to have like a stick in front of you because you'll just get slapped in the face with these webs. I hear that the bikers, people who bike in the cross country, right, they're just like terrified of these things because you're biking along a trail and you get whipped in the face every 3 seconds. So the webs are everywhere. The spiders are huge. So it's kind of no wonder that this thing is kind of it made some international news. This is a picture showing the size of the spiders in relation to a person's hand. This was my student picking up spiders for a project. And this is a spider in my hand. And that's kind of a small one. They'll get to be much bigger than that. I've got some more pictures here. One other thing to note about the webs themselves is that they tend to be yellow in color. I've read that has to do with what the spiders actually eat, and the yellow may or may not be help with their actual web strength. In their native range, just as an aside, in the native range, this genus of spiders is sort of prized, or at least it's well studied for the tensile properties of their silk. And there's a lot of research. If you actually go into the literature, there's a lot of research trying to figure out what makes this spider's webs so strong. And so, yeah, so there's a huge spider, scary looking, giant webs everywhere, and really, really strong webs. So you can see why this thing is such a superstar. And the other thing that you'll note, especially here in the northeast of Georgia, is that the webs in the fall are kind of everywhere. I mean, this is a shot from a random shot around town here in Athens, looking up at some power lines, and they really love these power lines. And in a dewy morning, these webs kind of get sort of highlighted from the dew. And the other thing you'll see if you're here in this area is that these webs, the spiders have no trouble making a web in the middle of your driveway or on your car or on your porch. They seem to be really tolerant of human activities and human sort of structures and landscapes. I find this kind of interesting too, because you just don't see this with native species like garden spiders or other orb weaving species that they're off in trees or in bushes, but never like in a driveway. And so this species seems to have a unique tolerance that I find interesting for living with humans. So really big spider, webs everywhere, webs super strong, webs can be clustered, and they're right in your face, literally. So everything about the spider just just screams like attention. So here's a screenshot from iNaturalist from this morning, showing you the current records on iNaturalist anyway, for where this spider has been found. This is a zoomed out view to show you sort of the basic range so far. There's a couple of sightings one in Oklahoma, one in Maryland, West Virginia, that are pretty far out of the range. These are all accidental transfers or transport on a car, I guess you could say. This one here in Oklahoma, we actually knew about this one when it happened, because I tracked down the person who wrote the observation on iNaturalist, and it just so happened that it was a student from UGA and from the School of Ecology, and she had an office right down the hall from me. So I tracked her down and I asked her about it, and it turned out she had just gone to visit her parents in Oklahoma the day before that spider was found, and it was found like just in the driveway, and so it was pretty clear that it was a transport. But you know, that plus these other ones, and actually this one in West Virginia, I do know that one was also a transport. This just shows you how easy it is that these spiders can spread by human means. That's in addition to the normal range, the normal way of spreading, which is by that ballooning thing that I mentioned, or the parachuting. So here's a sort of a blown up version of that map, showing you Northeast Georgia and where all the sightings are. Right here is Atlanta. Right here is Athens. This is where I am right now. And you can kind of see, one thing I noted from looking at this map earlier this morning is that there tends to be more, I could be wrong, but there tends to be more sightings to the north of this introduced range than the south. And I don't know if this means that they're spreading more northward than southward. It does make sense given their physiology to me. But yeah, it's just a general impression that I got from looking at this map. So I get a lot of emails these days from people concerned about joro spiders, and I didn't set out to be the joro guy, but I kind of am now. But a lot of people ask me this, similar questions, and I sort of have some general thoughts that I usually give people whenever they ask me questions. And this is just to tell you folks, if you're not currently in a place where these joro spiders are, this is sort of to get you prepared for when they do arrive in your area. Because this is what it's like now here in Northeast Georgia after just 10 years. Let me back up for a second. So initially, these spiders were found, I think it was right around here somewhere. Hopefully you can see my cursor, but I'm pointing to the middle of between Atlanta and Athens. And so all these dots here are just after 10 years of spreading. And so the spiders are doing quite well colonizing these new areas. So when you do get to an area where there's lots of these spiders, this is kind of what it's like. All of your homes, all of your yards have lots and lots of spider webs. They're everywhere. If you're walking in the woods, you'll need to have a stick with you. No one likes to hear this, right? Because most people are afraid of spiders. And so I get these crazy emails and phone calls all the time about people who are afraid of this. I actually got one the other day. This is an aside. I got one the other day from a person in Michigan, somewhere in the Midwest, who emailed me asking if they should move because of the coming joro spider invasion. Because this guy's wife was terrified of spiders. So that's how crazy people can get with these things. So the other thing I get all the time is emails with pictures of people saying, is this a joro? Is this a joro? And so in this presentation, I've just got a few screenshots here of some native spiders that aren't joros, just for people to be aware of. This one I get all the time. This is a common garden spider. They're everywhere in North America. It's a native species. It's also black and white or black and yellow. And it has a similar size, maybe even a similar leg morphology. So I get this one a lot. People ask me if this is a joro. I say it's not. Please don't kill it. Here's one that's really pretty. Sometimes get this one, marbled orb weaver, not a joro. This one, has at a very young stage. This is an orchard orb weaver, also a native. This one at a very young stage, you could misidentify this as a joro because at a very young stage, they tend to be similar. But this one here, their webs tend to be more horizontal of all things. So that's a good way to tell these ones apart. And then finally, I've mentioned this one a couple of times so far. This one on the right here is the cousin to the joro. And you notice the similar sort of features between the two species here. So the joro's on the left, Trichonephila clavata, and the one on the right is Trichonephila clavipes. This is the golden silk spider. And this spider here has been in the US for many years, over 100 years. And it's unclear whether it's native to here or whether it was introduced to here. But at this point, it doesn't really matter because they're kind of everywhere in the Southeast, which I'll get to in a second. But I get this a lot. People photograph the one on the right, they send it to me, and I tell them it's not, it's a native one. And the way to tell this species apart for sure is that they tend to have these hairy, knobby knees, where the joro spider doesn't have that. Anyway, so I told you about this species here to tell you about the next thing here. So I'm going to get to my actual study here that I did a couple of years ago, and I'm going to spend some time talking about this because this was my very first sort of joro spider study, and it ended up being probably the most read study I've ever written in my life, unbeknownst to me to begin with. And it ended up sort of making headlines almost around the world. It was kind of a bizarre thing. So as Brett mentioned earlier, my research focus is more on sort of animal physiology. And so when I first found this joro, I was immediately thinking, okay, what is it about the physiology of this joro that's sort of different from other spiders? And can we actually use our information about the physiology to maybe even predict where the spider could go? And that was the goal behind this study here, which was published in this journal, obviously, Physiological Entomology. And it was myself and an undergraduate at the time who had done this project. And the idea here was to basically compare the physiology of the joro on the right to the golden silk spider on the left. And the reason is because of this right here. So if you look at this is a map from using observations of these two species from iNaturalist. And if you look at the blue dots here, those are the observations of clavipes, of the golden silk spider. And as you can see, it's kind of a tropical species, really. And lots of sightings in Central America and also in the Southeast. And if you look up here, notice how their range kind of sort of halts right around here. And like I said, they've been here for many, many years, decades, but yet they haven't really colonized much further beyond that. And so we thought that might be because this species is more of a tropical species to begin with, and maybe they can't tolerate a more northern climate. And so along comes the joro spider, which is here in red, and it's the close cousin to this other one that's already here. And so we had this idea, let's compare the physiology of both of these. If the joro spider physiology matches this physiology of the one in blue here, then that would tell us that maybe that the joro spider would be similarly confined to the Southeast. If not, then that would tell us then they wouldn't be confined to the Southeast. Or at least that was our general idea. So in our study, we collected spiders of both species from the portion here in red, and then we collected clavipes from these points with the stars here, just to get a good assortment of the two species. We collected a whole bunch of these. We brought them to my lab, and I've got lots of gizmos and gadgets in my lab that allow me to sort of collect physiological data on spiders. And this is one of the gadgets I have. It's just a simple oxygen sensor. You put the spider inside the tube, and the sensor registers how much oxygen is being used by the spider as it breathes. And you leave the spider in there for a set amount of time, and then you can then gauge how much oxygen has been used over time, which is another way to measure sort of the metabolic rate of a species. And so our idea here was to sort of compare the metabolic rate of the joros to their cousin to see if the metabolism was different. And sure enough, it was. If you look at the oxygen consumption of the joros, it was twice as much as the clavipes, as the golden silk spiders. So that was our first clue that the physiology of the joros is different. Having a higher metabolism is a really good sign that your body is adapted to more of a colder environment. Like a lot of species that live in the northern regions have higher metabolisms. It's just sort of a general trend in biology. So once we had done this, we next did this other test where we actually looked at the heart rates of spiders as sort of a further confirmation of this same of the metabolism. Heart rate is sort of easy to measure in spiders. This green arrow is pointing to the actual heart of that spider there. You can actually see it on their just under the skin on the backside. And in all insects and spiders, their heart is kind of like it's a long tube, and the tube itself, like the walls of the tube, pulsate. And you can see that wall, and this green arrow is pointing to that tube going down the back here, and the wall sort of pulsates if you look at it closely under a microscope. And so anyway, we brought these spiders into my lab. We measured their heart rates after we had chilled them down. And then this is what we found here with the heart rates, which was very similar to what we found with the metabolism, which makes perfect sense. So their heart rates are faster in the joros. And finally, one of the funniest things we did with this project was we put some of the spiders in our freezer. We just moved some of the freezer bits aside, and we put some of these spiders in tubes. We threw them into a freezer. I make it sound pretty easy, but it was a little bit more complicated than that. But essentially, we exposed them to a short period of cold to see how well they'd survive, right? To sort of get at how cold tolerant are they. And the end result was that 50% of the golden silk spiders survived our cold exposure, but then 75% of the joros survived the cold. So we have higher metabolism, a higher heart rate, and a higher cold tolerance of the joros. We put all that together in this paper, and we concluded that the joro spiders do not have a physiology that matches the golden silk spider at all, which means they won't be confined to the southeastern US. And we then suggested that since their bodies are adapted to more of a colder environment, and because of its natal range, it will probably spread throughout the eastern seaboard. And if you look at the natal range on iNaturalist, which is there on the right, all those dots there are joro spider dots. You can see that it overlaps with there's quite a big overlap in terms of latitude there. And in fact, the country of Japan has similar latitudes, a latitudinal gradient similar to the eastern seaboard of the US here. So given our results from the physiology measurements, and given the sort of the natural latitudinal range, we completely expected the joro spiders to spread throughout most of the eastern seaboard. So that's when the story went. So the paper was published. I thought that was the end of it. Then the story kind of went viral after that. everybody had a collective heart attack after hearing about this. I know that the joro has been in this country for 10 years now, but our paper kind of blew the lid off of the story, and everybody was calling me, and I had reporters and emails, and I spent, it was this time last year, actually, I spent the better part of at least a week on my phone right here in my office, answering phone calls, doing interviews. It was kind of everywhere. The media went nuts about this. Here's some stories. I kind of laugh about it now because a lot of this went out of control, and it really shouldn't have. But people sort of took this story and went wild with it because they heard that parachuting thing that I mentioned before, and people got confused, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose, to create some of these headlines here. And I don't know, these things have a life of their own, apparently. So once this story got into the news, it sort of morphed over time, and it got out of my control at that point. So as I said, it went everywhere. We were kind of keeping track at one point here at Georgia to see where it went, and it was, everywhere. But this was probably the coup de grace. I've never had my work, my research, make it into mainstream pop culture, but people in late night television were making fun, were cracking jokes about this story, like Jimmy Fallon, Seth Meyers. I was on the Today Show. There were T-shirts made, which I have. People sent me the T-shirts. So I've never had that happen after 25 years of doing research, and I laugh about it now, but it was something. And so I can't tell the story about that paper without talking about the media frenzy. It even went, I have this framed. It even went into tabloids. This is a framed shot of a tabloid that I have in my office. Giant demon spiders infesting America. So that was a trip for me. And then the social media was also nuts. People were crazy about the spider. So, I'd like to think that in the future, my work on this spider won't make that kind of frenzy. And I don't know how to prevent that. I know after that paper came out, there was another paper that came out describing how, really the journalists should really, rein themselves in on this. But, to be fair, journalism these days is there's not really much reining in the world of journalism right now. So I kind of learned a lot about the way journalism works with this whole viral thing, because I realized that there really isn't much reining in the world of media. All right, so let me move on to some other work. I mean, that was my one main project that I had done, and I've sort of been dabbling in the joro spider world again since then in my lab, and I've got several projects that are ongoing. Nothing's published yet, but I've got several projects ongoing where I'm also studying the joros plus their relatives, and I'll just briefly tell you about some of those. This was one that was published a few months ago, actually, and it was just a really an observation that we reported on. Myself and this gentleman here. This is a citizen in Atlanta who happened to photograph a bird sitting on a joro spider web, like sitting on the web as it was eating some of the food out of the web. And this guy called me up out of the blue one day, and he said he's got pictures, and I didn't believe him, and he sent me the pictures, and I was like, holy crap. And we realized collectively that this should be published. It was such an interesting observation. I mean, I don't know if there's any other observation. In fact, I don't think there's any other observation of any other record of a spider web strong enough to hold a bird, especially a large bird like a cardinal. So we published this study, this observational study, and it was really just 2 or 3 pages describing what this guy had found. This is on the left is a picture of the joro spider web in this gentleman's home in the back of his house. And it was a fairly typical web, 2 or 3 feet wide, lots of support strands. There's the picture of the spider in the middle. And this is a picture of what he saw that one day when he saw the bird. This is a female cardinal sitting on the web. She flew down, according to this gentleman. She flew down, sat on the web. The spider moved off. Initially, this guy thought that the bird was trapped in the web, but then he saw that it wasn't, and it was just calmly going about its day, eating some of the scraps of food that were stuck in the web. And after a couple of minutes, the bird flew off, and the web was undamaged. And so that's kind of a freaky event, because it shows you just how strong those webs were. And the other thing about this event, and what we put this in the paper too, is that a year ago, I had actually done a little mini science experiment with my 12-year-old son. Well, he was 11 at the time, and we had done a little science fair project where we wanted to know how strong were the joro webs. And we actually had measured how much force it requires to pull a web down. We had a little gizmo and we measured it. And after this gentleman contacted me about the bird, I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and I went back and looked at my son's science fair project and realized his data actually proved that the webs were indeed strong enough to support a bird of this size. And so that kind of made it into the study as well. So it was kind of a fun little project. And so this is sort of another case where it just demonstrates that these spider webs are really, really strong. So I've got a bunch of other projects on the go right now. I've got one in review that may or may not come out sometime in the next couple of months, looking at the joro spider personality. One thing that struck me about the joros is that they seem to be kind of shy. You can actually hold them in your hand, as I'm doing here. And in going through the literature on spiders, it seems like there's a way to actually measure shyness in spiders by like blowing a puff of air at their face, which sounds weird, but we've sort of figured out how to do this. And we meaning myself and another undergraduate student, we caught a whole bunch of joro spiders, brought them to my lab, blew some puffs of air in their face. And then what you do is you measure, or you time how long they kind of like freeze. And it's called a thanatosis state. It's kind of like playing dead, although they don't really curl up their appendages or anything like that. They just sort of stop moving. And then for comparison, we actually did this with a few other species, but as you see here, plus we actually collected some data from the published literature on the quote unquote shyness of some of these other species. So I'm not going to give away the ending here and tell you what we found, but if this paper does get accepted, it'll, maybe it'll generate some news, although hopefully not the craziness that the other project did. I have another project ongoing right now where I have a student, this nice lady right here, who's measuring latitudinal variation in morphology of the joros in their native range. And this is sort of one of my interests as well. A lot of different species have morphological adaptations that allow them to live in different climates. And if you look at pictures of joros from their native range, there's a pretty striking degree of difference, as you can see here, of joros from the north versus south. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is we're going back and looking at pictures. This nice lady here is doing that. She's looking at pictures, and we're actually measuring aspects of the joro spider morphology to see if it sort of correlates with latitude. And if so, that would indicate that the joros are capable of sort of changing or adapting to live at higher latitudes versus lower latitudes, which would be another sort of way to get at the same question, really, as we did with the physiology. Like how capable are these joros of spreading throughout this new area? And then the last one I want to talk about is this crazy one here. I mentioned before that the joros seem especially tolerant of living with humans. And that, to me, that strikes me as a way, as something that is a trait that's specific to them that allows them to do that. Like you don't see garden spiders or other native spiders, hanging out on people's cars or on their back porches or on mailboxes. I've seen them here. I've seen joros literally on streetlights above busy intersections here in Athens. Streetlights, like with cars zooming below them. You don't see that with other spiders. So there's something about joros that I think where they have a specific physiology that allows them to be tolerant of stressors. And so these crazy pictures here show my attempts to purposely stress joro spiders here in the lower left, and measure their reaction to this stressor, and compare that to different other species. So here we've got the other Trichonephila. We've got two species of Argiope, the garden spider and the banded garden spider. These spiders aren't being harmed. They're just being sort of held down with insect pins. Those pins aren't going through them at all. And the idea here was to restrain the spiders and stress them on purpose. And then what we did, myself and yet another undergraduate, we measured their heart rates in reaction to this stressor to see which species has a sort of has a higher heart rate in response to that stressor. And so again, I won't give away the ending here, but that's sort of one of the other things that I'm doing right now in my lab. This one hasn't even been, I haven't even put pen to paper on this one yet. We do have the data in hand, and we're just now evaluating it now. So you can kind of see what kinds of research projects I like to do in my lab. Lots of crazy stuff, lots of spiders in tubes and spiders in containers and spiders under microscopes and that kind of thing. All right, so I want to finish here with just some thoughts about their spread. So that first project that I had done sort of talked about how they have a potential of spreading throughout the eastern seaboard based on their physiology. With more recent data and more time to observe them and study them, what I found so far, and this is getting back to some of this project and some of another one, what I found so far is that their physiology most closely matches this other spider here, the banded garden spider. They have a very similar physiology to this one, similar temporal distribution, and similar thermal tolerance. If that's the case, then if you just look at the range of the garden spider, which is here, this is the banded garden spider, I would guess that the joro spiders would probably match that at some point. At some point is the key word here. So we don't know how long it would take to get to that point. They are being transported by cars, but they're also spreading of their own accord. The thing to keep in mind is that there's tens of millions of them now. They're not going anywhere. Like I've had people email me and say, why can't you scientists just get rid of them all? And I tell them, there's tens of billions now. Each female lays 1,000 eggs or 500 eggs, or however many that is. It's a lot. We cannot get rid of them at this point. But I think they're going to spread pretty far. So here's the other question that I get all the time from people. What's their impact on the ecosystem? And this is probably something that's germane to what you guys do in the invasion world. The short answer here is we don't know. There's no studies yet, at least none published, showing us what their impact is or will be on the ecosystem. We do know that they do not physically harm the trees that they make webs on, or the bushes, or the buildings, or anything like that. At this point, the biggest harm that could be would be towards the native prey that other spiders would be eating. It doesn't seem like, from anecdotal observations, that they are pushing out the native species from anything we found. In fact, I've seen native spiders in the same tree on the same branch as joro spiders. So it doesn't seem like there's any competition there. But again, there's very little hard data on this. And so I threw this in here just in case people, after hearing this presentation, will, if they see one, I sort of end all my joro talks with these ideas in mind. Because people always call me when they see a joro spider and they want to know what to do, and I say, well, just leave it. I don't think it needs to be destroyed or moved or anything like that. You can move it, I guess, if you wanted to get it away from your path, your walkway. But I tell people they're just going to be back next year. You can hire a pest control company if you want, and they will blast your yard and get rid of all the spiders. But they'll also be getting rid of all the natives, all the other beneficial insects as well. And so you can get rid of all your spiders 1 year, but they'll just be back the next year. And so it's a little futile. And so I've been telling people, maybe use these spiders as an educational tool. Show them to your kids. I mean, if you think about it, that joro spider on your back porch is going to be there for 4 months. It's going to be there catching bugs, doing its thing. It's not going to bother you if you don't bother it. And so it's almost like the perfect little natural educational tool. Show your kids what spiders do. We're not going to get rid of them, so we might as well make use of them, And also, I think we need to teach people not to be afraid of spiders, because the vast majority of the stories that came from that one study were all focused on people's inherent fear of spiders. And I think that's kind of like it's misguided. These spiders aren't out to get us. Spiders in general aren't out to get us, but people think they are. And that's all something that we learn as kids, and it really shouldn't be. So, and this is a little bit tangential, but my kids aren't scared of spiders. I think that's for a reason, because I've taught them, this is a spider, it does it, it has a job in nature, just leave it. It's not going to bother you. And so my kids look at these spiders the same way I do. And so we humans, we parents are teaching our kids to be afraid of spiders. And I think we need to stop that. Okay, so I'm winding down, and I want to leave some time for questions, but here's what I think we should take away from this. The joro spiders are here to stay. I think, and this is just a guess, but they'll cover the Southeast in 5 years. And I think within 20 years, they'll be throughout the Eastern Seaboard. I mean, they're already in Baltimore because of human transport. So it's only a matter of time before they get everywhere. They're scary looking, but they're not harmful to people. They appear to be not harmful to vegetation. Their impact on the ecosystem is unknown, and I think we need to learn to appreciate them. Okay, so I'll be happy to take questions on all of this. And thanks everybody for their attention.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. That was super informative. I enjoyed that talk. And I was really hoping you were going to talk on the natural history of the spider. So thank you. We do have a few questions here. And do you know, so Cindy Simpson asked a question, do you know of any studies or monitoring to detect whether birds or large pollinators are captured in these webs, since they're so large and sturdy? I would expect a large population could create impacts to local bird and or pollinator populations. Okay, so it's a good question. I've gotten this before. There's very few records of this spider. In fact, there's no records of this spider eating a bird. There is one record that I know of its cousin, the golden silk spider, where a small songbird had gotten trapped in its web
and it died because it couldn't get out. The spider didn't intend to get that bird, but the bird just got trapped and then died because it couldn't get out. And that was a small songbird. It was a Tennessee warbler. So I read that, and there was actually a study, an observation published on that. So their webs are strong enough for a bird to get caught in. And the joro spiders have a web that's basically the same as a golden silk spider.
So,
However,
oh, sorry.
However, I think with the number of webs we have now, we would have seen this by now if this occurred with regularity. There are millions of these joro webs, and if a bird were trapped in a web, or if a spider was eating a web, I would have gotten a phone call easily, and I haven't.
And then I was just curious, so from your observations, what are the dominant, like what groups of insects are you seeing them feed on? Are they moths or butterflies, or just, is it random? And because the architecture of the webs is so chaotic, it seems like it would be easy to see almost. I don't know.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's any study yet on this. It does seem random. I know spiders catch different taxonomic groups of insects depending on whether they predominantly hunt or have webs during the day or versus night. If it's at night, which is what a lot of our native spiders do, then they catch lots of moths and night flying bugs. If other spiders hunt during the day, you tend to get more Hymenoptera, flies, that kind of thing. I've seen lots of both in joro spider webs because their webs are sort of open for business 24/7. They don't take down their web at the end of the day. It's the same web that they use the entire season. So that brings me to another interesting observation that I've made. There's a few species of really tiny spiders that are native to North America that are kleptoparasites of other spider webs. They make their homes on other spider webs. So they're called dewdrop spiders. They're literally the size of a pencil head. They live their lives on other spider webs, sort of running around and eating the debris that other spiders leave. And I've seen these native dewdrop spiders on joro spider webs. In fact, at least 30% of the joro spider webs I've seen have these native kleptoparasitic spiders, which means that those kleptoparasitic spiders are actually making use of joro spider webs.
And another question by Jeanette, and you kind of addressed this in the slide, but just in case there's some other information, what are the impacts of the impacts on natural or environmental areas? I guess you were saying that work hasn't been really done about system or specific impacts.
I have a colleague here at UGA who's currently working on that, and I think they have some exclusion projects going on where they're purposely removing joros from certain areas and not in others to see what the sort of the difference is in terms of the native insect fauna. I think that project is ongoing. We probably won't have data on that for a couple of years, and or a publication on that for a while. So that's the one project that I do know of where people are experimentally testing their impact. As I said, so far, there's no harm to the trees or the vegetation or the structures that these guys live on. I mean, I've been telling people that compared to some of our other invasive bugs, like the spotted lanternfly, like the joro spider isn't even in that same category. Spotted lanternflies are literally eating trees, right? And they're decimating entire ecosystems in the Northeast. In fact, I think joros are going to start eating the spotted lanternflies when they get to the Northeast. So it would be interesting to see what happens, because we'll have an invasive eating invasive kind of thing situation, because they're both from the same geographic area in the world.
Have you Dia Laurence, who's actually a co-founder of Southeast Risk, asked, or more of a statement, but I'm going to turn her statement into a question. To understand the dynamics of invasion, the spread, have you looked at like EDMAPS data or INAT and looked at like from the initial introduction, like how far have these observations moved over time? Like, is there a rate at which they're spreading? I know they're jumping with vehicles, but just from kind of the epicenter, how many kilometers per year are they moving?
I haven't done that. And I don't think that's something that it hasn't been a focus of mine because I don't really do this for a living. I'm more of a physiology kind of guy, as I said. It does seem like they're spreading pretty fast. They're in all neighboring states at this point, including some that they've reached, from transport. So it does seem like if you look at the iNaturalist maps, that whenever there's a new colonization or a new sighting well outside of the range, which is obviously from a vehicle, the next year, the next fall, sure enough, there'll be other dots scattered around that one range, which tells me that there was a sort of a new introduction to a new area. That's not really what you asked, but that's kind of all I've got on that subject, because I don't really do that.
Well, any other questions? I don't see any popping up. But so I think with that, it's 2:00, so we'll conclude. But thank you, Andy, for presenting today and giving us your time and sharing. And everyone stay tuned to or join us in April. April, I think it's 20th, the third Thursday in April for our next webinar. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Have a nice weekend. Thank you, Andy.
All right. See you, folks.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.